Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ivan DeVoe. I'm one of the case managers at UMNSU CARD. I work in our research and behavioral division. And so although I do a lot of the responsibilities that all of the clinicians do, I also try to focus more on the, behavioral aspect of things. And so most of my background has to do with behavior analysis, and I enjoy talking about this subject quite a lot. So today what we're going to do is try to give you guys an understanding of what behavior really is, and kind of give you some examples as to why might be the reasons of behavior happening, you know, at different times throughout your classroom instruction. So, I believe that the more of an understanding you have of what those underlying reasons might be, then the easier it is to maybe address some of those challenges. So we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll try to give you as many examples as I can think of, so that it kind of makes sense to you. And then we'll also try to tie that to that teach fidelity form that you have. And so we'll try to, match this presentation to that so that it kind of makes sense in the future as you're going through that list, that you're going, okay, I remember what this was about. And then, obviously, if you have any questions, you can write those in the chat box, and, I'll be happy to answer those at the end of the presentation. Okay. So let me go ahead and get started. Let's see over here if this is working. All right. So like I mentioned before, today we're going to talk about behavioral strategies. And I always like to begin my presentation by explaining a little bit about what behavior is. And there's many different definitions of behavior, but I believe that having a broad understanding of what it really is really helps us, sort of understand how to think of things from a more behavioral perspective, for lack of a better word, in the sense that we're not trying to analyze things in a personal way, or maybe in a mentalistic way where we're trying to sort of think of how somebody might be feeling, but rather how is the environment interacting with those around us, in this case, the students. And so what is behavior? And, behavior can be defined as a response. And that response can be from an individual, it can be from a group, or it can be from any species to their environment. And so like I was saying before, what we're really going to be talking about is how does, let's say, the little girl in the picture that's brushing her teeth react to the way I set up the bathroom? How is it that the interaction between that setup around her has an effect on the way that she behaves? That's really what we're interested in. That's what we're going to be talking about throughout our presentation. And for purposes of addressing behavior, that's going to be the approach that's going to be the most effective. And so when you look at your fidelity, your Teach Fidelity checklist, it talks about behavior management, being influenced by an understanding of the culture of autism. And so, for instance, it talks about how the behavior challenges are analyzed and recognizing the deficits and developmental level of the student, as well as reframing the problems from the perspective of a person with autism, can be very effective. And so I think that a lot of times it's very difficult to comprehend perhaps what are all the challenges that come with maybe having a specific diagnosis, specifically in the case of autism, given that it's such a broad spectrum. It's very difficult sometimes to differentiate what might be tied to the autism and what might not. And I'm going to try to maybe, pinpoint some of the areas that might be, sort of like usual areas that are affected by this, just so that you can have some better sense of maybe where to look. Because I know how difficult it can be, and how sometimes some students may even have different diagnoses. So not only the autism, but sometimes other diagnoses that are taking place. And it's very difficult to determine what might be really the reason behind their behavior. The other thing that it talks about is that behavior interventions are designed and implemented around an understanding of the developmental level and the perspective of the person with autism. And so That part about the developmental level, it's very, very essential because even within one classroom, you may have a lot of students that are on different levels. And even students that perhaps present themselves as being capable of maybe, let's say, communicating very effectively, may not have the same ability in other areas. One example that I like to give about this is, for instance, when you look at students that have an intellectual disability, oftentimes they don't present as typical autism cases, meaning that they might show, like when you do testing, to be higher in areas where they're not supposed to be. And that can be sometimes a little bit confusing for anyone, not just teachers, but just professionals in general. So it's something to always keep in mind. We always want to look at all the information that we have available as far as testing goes, as to, what level are they on, what kind of conditions do they have, what have they been tested for and things like that. So let's talk a little bit more about what are the skill deficits and problem behavior. And so, I mentioned that there's going to be many areas that could be impacted by autism, but there's definitely some key areas that we're going to talk about. One of them is going to be instruction following. And this is a very, very important area because this is an area that's really going to determine whether somebody can be oftentimes in a regular education classroom or not. And so even the ability to hopefully eventually, sort of like be able to mainstream into an inclusive classroom is determined by someone's ability to follow instructions. Now, one of the things that's very extremely important to take into account during this is that somebody may have the ability to follow instructions, but they might not have the ability to follow complex instructions. And it's good to differentiate both, meaning that somebody may be able to get up from their chair, put their book away, and grab their backpack if we split that into separate instructions, but they might not be able to do it when we put it all together. I think that this is important to remember before we think about maybe what are the type of goals that we're going to create from somebody, realistically speaking, within a classroom. Because we want to be able to make targets that are going to be attainable, that they're going to be able to, to be successful at. And so one of the things that you're probably going to encounter is that a lot of your students are going to be probably better at one-step instructions, and you might have to separate those instructions throughout anything that you're doing in the day. And the next part that might be impacted is going to be their language. And their language can be impacted in many ways. It can be impacted expressively in a way that's very noticeable, where they, maybe they need a visual communication system just to even request something basic, or maybe to, be able to communicate the need for something. Or maybe, they present as being very outspoken and like they can communicate all of their needs. And yet, if you mention something to them, their language might be, their language processing might be a bit impaired. And so these are things to take into account also, that you may have either of those extremes where somebody might, have a very difficult time expressing themselves verbally, but can do it very well visually. But you may also have somebody that maybe talks a ton, and yet they have such a difficult time understanding what you're asking from them. Then the next thing is going to be the tolerance for delay. And I think that the tolerance for delay, it's important to mention, but it's something that relates to any of us. I mean, we're all humans, and we have probably all have a difficult time with the tolerance for delay. The difference is really, in my opinion, that we are better at hiding that, or at least finding an outlet on how to deal with, that intolerance that we have. And so we may have to be the ones to teach our students what are some of those skills that we already have. We can't just assume that they have the same skill set that we do. So those might be some of the targets that we have for them, is teach them how to be tolerant, or what are things to do while you're trying to tolerate things. And then the last part, obviously, it's a very, very important part, is the friendship and the empathy. And this part can be very tricky when you think about social skills. Obviously, every student has a different personality, despite of their, whatever diagnosis that they all have different personalities. And even when somebody might be very impacted and perhaps is very limited with language, you can still see people that like to joke around more, they like to laugh more. And this also has an effect on, how successful can they be at building friendships and maybe having empathy for others. Um, but the important part to know is that typically when it comes to autism, um, you know, our population has very strong interest in certain specific areas. And although that can be very productive from a professional perspective in the future when they have a job or something like that, it can hinder them in social terms. So, being able to only talk about trains or to only talk about movies that were made in the 60s, although very interesting, can sort of box you into, one little category of people that you can meet. And so we have to be mindful of that too. How are these strong interests shaping the way that our students behave? And understand that it's not necessarily that they don't want to take the time to get to know other people, or that they don't want to make the effort to maybe listen to other people, but that perhaps their interests are not as broad as everyone else's. So they have a harder time doing that, have a harder time finding things in common with other people. So it could be also our role to maybe try to identify those things. One example that I love to give in this part is that I remember I used to work with somebody when I was in undergrad in college, and I was a volunteer. And there was this individual, he was an adult with autism, and I was trying to find things to do with him and things that we had in common. And I would ask him all the time, like, are you sure you don't play sports? And he would tell me, no, no, I don't like sports. And sure enough, one day we're walking around campus and we bump into a pool that was there. And he's like, oh my God, I love swimming. And I was like, you're kidding, and I realized then that sometimes it's also the way we conceptualize things. So even finding things like that, where like then all of a sudden I could spend time with him in the pool. And even if it wasn't necessarily this activity that was defined as a sport, it was something that we had in common. And so, opening yourself to identifying those things for a student can really, really have a strong impact in them in the future. So let's talk a little bit about what happens when it comes to, you know, problem behavior and what we call like a payoff or a reward. And so usually when we're talking about behavior happens because it leads to a consequence. And this is the way that it works for all of us, every single one of us. We do things with the idea that we're going to get something in return. Now, what we get in return may vary depending on the situation. We may do things because we're trying to get attention from someone. Like if you get your phone and you're calling them, you're trying to get their attention, you need to tell them something. Or we may make a face sometimes when somebody says something that's rude because we want to get a reaction out of them. We want them to know, look, I want you to behave differently about this. The same way that maybe we can do things to escape a situation, to avoid a situation that perhaps we're not interested in. Like let's say having to go run 5 miles today, which is not your favorite part of the day. So maybe you're not so sad about having to do a meeting that prevents you from doing that. Or maybe, access to items or activities, maybe I engage in behaviors because I want to have access to my favorite toy, or maybe my favorite activity at some point. Now, one of the things that's going to be important when thinking about, whether somebody's doing something because of attention, whether they're doing it because of escape, whether they're doing it because they want to try and access a tangible, is that the way those look might be very different for everyone. And so your idea of perhaps an escape or your idea of an item that would be desirable might be very different than the one that for the students. And I think that will be a good exercise in the future always to think about that. Because for a student, getting a reprimand because they did something wrong might be the only time when they get the teacher's attention. It might be that they don't have the ability to raise their hand and participate throughout class usually. But when they do something bad, the teacher comes and they tell them, Remember, we say you're not supposed to do that. And even if they say it in the nicest of way, it's the one time when the student is getting so much attention from the teacher, from the paraprofessional. And it's very hard not to want to get that again. You know, you're tempted to engage in the same behavior over and over again. Um, Even if it happens accidentally at first, what you end up learning is that this is what leads to what you enjoy the most. And that's going to be the case the same for escaping activities. Like let's say if you behave a certain way to the point where that you have to be removed from the classroom, maybe the first time it's an accident, but then you learn, hey, if I do this, if I throw myself on the floor, and there's a no tolerance rule for that, I get sent to the office. I'm there sitting with with the assistant principal, which I love. She's so cool. She's giving me lollipops all day. Then they call my mom, and my mom gets out of work to be with me because I threw myself on the floor. It's the best scenario ever. So this is the way that we have to conceptualize things to really understand why problem behavior may happen so often. So how do we reduce this? So how are we going to be able to prevent these things from happening? There are two main ways to do that. One of the ways that we can do this is that we can address some of the skill deficits. So when we were talking about some of the ways in which somebody with autism may be limited, if we go about trying to address those, then maybe we can limit the instances where they may have to resort to problem behavior to gain access to things because they couldn't do it any other way. So in other words, if somebody wants attention, if somebody wants escape, they want access to something, that desire is not going away. The only thing that we can do is that we can replace the maladaptive behavior or the problem behavior with something that is, potentially seen as being better and that it's easier to do. Because that's the only way that the problem behavior is going to go away, is that we're making it easier for you to gain access to what you want with less effort and also doing something that to us is appropriate. And we have to remember that it's something that to us, to society, it's appropriate, but our students may never understand that concept. And so that's the part that we have to come to terms with, is that we have to make it easier for them, because the part of it being appropriate is such a abstract concept to teach, that's not going to be the way for them to understand that that's what they're supposed to do. Instead, if we make it easier for them to behave properly, then they'll just by nature end up doing that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing that we can do to sort of help ourselves with facilitating things in an appropriate way is that we want to eliminate or at least minimize the rewards for the problem behavior. So at the same time that we're going about making it easier to maybe participate in class, or making it easier for you to request for a break in an appropriate way, then we also want to make sure that when you don't do it appropriately, we're not allowing you to encounter that reinforcement that's keeping you continuing engaging in that behavior over and over and over. And at the beginning, it might be difficult. At the beginning, you might need support from somebody from your school or your paraprofessionals to even notice when are the moments that we're reinforcing these behaviors. It's not such an easy thing always. Even for professionals that have been doing this their entire lives, it's always good to have a new set of eyes. And so, at the end of the presentation, we'll talk a little bit more about what are some resources that you can tap into, even from your district, to hopefully, give you a new fresh of eyes of maybe what are some things that you can try. So at this point, what I want to do is I want to talk about, what are some behavior strategies that we can implement. And basically, we're going to talk about proactive strategies, or what we call antecedent strategies, because that's what's going to be the most effective. The best way to deal with problem behavior is making sure that it doesn't happen. Once a student is escalating and they're engaging in property destruction, or they're engaging, in disruption of the class, or any other type of problem behavior, then it's already too late. Whatever strategy you can implement at that point it's just helping to put out the fire, but the fire is already there. And it's already a pretty big fire. And so what we want to do is try to create this safety net where we're preventing us from getting to the fire, so to speak. And so when you look at your fidelity checklist from Teach, it talks about behavior management strategies, emphasizing positive antecedent-based approaches and the prevention of problem behaviors, and then also having limits and rules that are visually clarified and made concrete for each student. I think that last part is very important because number one, you definitely want to have your rules. And the idea of rules being clear may vary from one student to the next. The idea of rules being clear may involve you having those rules visually available at all times. Not everyone has the same ability to maybe access previous stored information in their brain. So it might be that you may have to refer that visually all the time throughout your instruction. And I believe that in the previous presentations, some of the strategies that they gave you was that if you have certain visual supports in place, you could continue giving your instruction while still referring to those. So you can gesture to a rule while you're talking to the rest of your class, but letting somebody know, hey, this is what you need to be doing right now. And so just little things like that, it doesn't mean that it's going to work the same way for everyone, but it can certainly have an effect on certain students, and you're going to notice and you're going to start picking out, okay, this works better for this type of student. And then, maybe giving more breaks works better for another type of student. So what are some of the strategies that we're going to use? The first one is that we're going to use positive language. And so, for instance, we're going to tell the child what to do instead of what not to do. I always say that this is one of the hardest things to ever accomplish in life, not just at work, just in life in general. It's very easy to be negative. Our nature is to use negative language, and our nature is to point out the negative things. You don't have somebody giving you a pat in the back at work every day for everything good that you're doing. It just doesn't happen. But rest assured that if you forget one student out in another, in the bathroom or in another classroom, you're going to get called out for that. So it's very easy for things to turn the negative way. But the idea behind this is that we're going to try and avoid using the word no. And so you can still point out the things that somebody's supposed to do, but you're not going to do it by mentioning what they're not supposed to do. So let's say if I want somebody to not be putting their hands in their mouth or maybe tapping with their hands on their desk, instead of saying, remember, we're not supposed to be making noises or we're not supposed to put our hands in our mouth, what about we say, remember to put your hands in your pockets, or remember to keep your hands close to you or something like that. It really depends. This is, again, where it's going to vary from student to student, but it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference the way that you're delivering that message with such a positive tone and, with a neutral facial expression, because now you're not giving attention for something that's being done incorrectly. Instead, you're giving positive feedback in a way that, one, addresses the problem, but also, two, is not competing with the other type of attention that you're giving at other times. That is the one that you want to be providing the most, which is the one that's going to promote the positive behaviors. Now let's talk about going from the positive language. Now let's talk a little bit more about that positive attention. So, what we want to do instead, so, okay, we correct a child, we tell them what they're supposed to be doing in a nice way, very neutral, positive language. And then what we do is that we try to catch them whenever they're behaving appropriately. And at those times, then we can use a lot more energy. So we want to have a distinction between when we're giving the positive feedback to when we're giving the positive attention. The positive attention has to be with a lot more energy, so that we really, really get their, we get a reaction out of them. So they go like, oh my God, this is crazy. I mean, these people are a little bit intense, but it's awesome. I'm getting something different out of them by doing this. You can use praise, you can use attention in those moments. And it could be anything. It could be that you catch them sitting down properly. It could be that you catch them picking up that pencil when you ask them to. The silliest thing, waiting patiently, like all these little skills that we're always trying to teach, and that once they're mastered, we assume they should always happen. Reinforce those behaviors, even if nothing else is happening, even if a student is not able to complete their work, even if they're not able to express something, or request a break, it doesn't matter. If they're able to sit down in a chair, if they're able to be quiet for 5 seconds, if they're able to, look at you when you call them by their name, reinforce that. Because they already have enough times when they're being called out for everything that they cannot do. And we need to do, all of us, not you guys, because we're very happy with everything that you guys do, but all of us as a society, we need to do a better job at always trying to be more positive in the attention that we give to everyone, because that really has an effect on people's days, even when you think about the professionals that you work with. And then, what we're going to use, one of the techniques that we also suggest is that you want to be genuine and descriptive with that praise, meaning that you want to really point out what is it that you like that they're doing. Because if you say, great job, yeah, that's a nice, that's a nice praise that you're giving somebody. But great job at what? What did I do? What is it that I'm supposed to do again for you to tell me great job? So you want to make sure that you describe what it is. Great job being able to stay in your seat a little longer today. Great job sharing that toy with your peer. That was amazing. I'm very, very happy and proud of you for doing that. And then the other thing that we're going to do is that when those inappropriate behaviors are happening, sometimes instead of even giving that positive feedback that we were talking about before, maybe sometimes we decide, what? There's so many positive things happening that I'm going to ignore the inappropriate behavior, and I'm only going to go around the classroom giving attention to the students that are doing things appropriately, so that the rest of the students start catching on to the fact that this is the only type of attention that I give. So very slowly you're gonna go from giving that feedback before to the things that weren't done in an appropriate way to now just basically ignoring it, especially the things that are not disruptive. So if a child's doing something that maybe they're not supposed to do, but it's not really disrupting the class, then it's probably not worth it to point it out to them and point it out in front of everybody. Instead, point out when they're doing it right. Try to catch them doing that same thing that they were doing inappropriately when they're doing it right, and make a huge party about it and tell them, I love to see that again. The next step in all these antecedent strategies is going to be the part about delivering instructions. And this is, a very complex task sometimes, in the sense that it's very sensitive. There are many things that need to happen for you to deliver an instruction effectively. One of the things that you will always want to try and do, if it's possible, if it's safe to do so, is to come down to the child's eye level. You may have noticed, some of you may already do it, but you may notice that even, as parents of children, sometimes when you're talking to them and you really want to get their attention, you kind of get down a little bit to their level. Because then they understand, oh, okay, you're trying to engage with me. You're not talking to somebody else over there. It's between you and me. It's very clear at that point who the interaction is with. You want to use language that matches their ability. Sometimes when we're trying to express ourselves, it's very easy to maybe say what first comes to mind, or what we have used in the past, maybe. But sometimes we may have to change the way we express things, specifically when we're dealing with kids that may be impaired in their language, because again, if we're not delivering something that they can quite understand, then we can't hold it against them that they're not following the instruction. So what are some ways that we can address that? Well, we can, for instance, provide a very simple instruction and try to make it as consistent as possible. So if we know that somebody has a hard time maybe checking their schedule, then we can make it very, very simple in terms of what steps do they need to do to follow their schedule and make sure that those steps don't change very often. So that way, eventually with time, even just by practice, they'll be more and more successful at it. So now you're not putting it so much on your delivery of the instruction, but also on them being able to already understand the situation that they're in. One thing that's very important is that although you may repeat the instruction once, you want to make sure that after that, you move to what we call a prompting hierarchy to promote that responding. And so you don't want to fall into this game where where you tell a student, hey buddy, it's time to open your book. And then he doesn't do it. And then you say it again. And then you're going to be like, okay, I'm going to give you some time. And then next thing you know, 10 minutes go by. And at the end, what ends up happening is that you end up opening it up with them. And so they're going to learn very quickly that it's always going to be the same pattern. And we don't want that to happen. So what we want instead is that we want you to give an instruction, very clear instruction. And then after that, if you notice that the person, needs assistance or whatever, then you can help them. So whether you need to help them physically, whether you need to gesture to them what they're supposed to be doing, or that you need to refer to some visual instructions that they have. But very important is to always follow through with the instructions, which connects to the last point about choosing your battles, because if you have to always follow through with your instruction, that means that you also have to be very wise in determining when are you going to be implementing certain programs. And so if you're trying to run a program that may lead to the child not wanting to respond, then maybe right before going home might not be the time to run that program, because you're not going to pick a back and forth between them to help them follow through with that instruction right before they go home. It's probably not the best time. So sometimes you may want to pick times when the student is in a better mood or there's less demands being thrown around to maybe practice some of the things that they're going to be struggling with. So that way, when you're really trying to do it in the moment, they already have practice and it's a little easier for them. And also for you. The other thing that we can do in terms of strategies is that we can always identify what we call high and low probability behaviors. And so the high probability behaviors are going to be behaviors that are already mastered. So this can be things like, doing a high five, doing things like touch your head, touch your nose, following like very basic things like that. These are going to be very important in trying to get somebody engaged. A lot of times when you're trying to present something that's non-desirable or something that is just difficult for somebody, this might be the way for you to get them sort of like in the rhythm, if you will. And then you're going to have your low probability behaviors, which are the things that the student is really trying to learn. These are the target skills that we're trying to work on. And we call them low probability because since it's something that you're trying to teach, it's not something that's probably going to occur as often. And so why do we separate them between high and low? Because if you only run a program with low probability behaviors, what's going to happen is that your chances of reinforcing a behavior are going to be very limited. And so you're basically arranging the environment in a way that the student is going to have very few chances to maybe get access to a toy, get access to your attention, or in any way get the things that they're looking for because they're struggling with the program because it's a new program. And so what do we want to do? What we want to do is we want to create what we call behavior momentum. And so we want to present a series of, high probability behaviors just to get that rhythm going, and then follow that with one of the low probability behaviors. So what does this mean? It means that even if we're working on a worksheet or something like this, we can be asking the student to do things that they already have mastered while we're working on this worksheet. So maybe write your name or circle the word A, something like this, or color, I don't know, anything. You can give, write a line, underline such word, all these things that maybe it's already in their repertoire. You can use this as some of those high probability behaviors. So it doesn't always have to be necessarily a high five or, doing this sort of like silly things. It could be stuff that they can do within that worksheet that they're working on. but maybe it's not part of the exercise that you're doing right then and there. And you might find that you're gonna notice a difference because you're allowing this person to then be given, feedback on how good they're doing those parts. So even if maybe they're not able to accomplish that low probability behavior, you can be like, you know what, you did great. That was a good try. We're gonna keep going. And you already earned 3 tokens anyway. So you're almost there on getting access to that iPad. And you're going to notice that for a lot of your students, this may have a very, very good impact because it's also going to build up their confidence. They're going to feel like, hey, you know what? When they give me a worksheet, it's not so boring. I can do a lot of the things that they're asking me to do. So another thing that you can do is something that we call the PREMAC principle, and it's making a high probability task contingent on the completion of the low probability task. So this is a little different than that behavioral momentum. What we're doing here, and this is something that you've probably heard of before as a first then board, is that you're saying, okay, first we're gonna complete this last trial right here. We're gonna do that last exercise, and then you're gonna get a big 2-minute break or something like that. That can be also very useful, but if you're going to use something like this, it is very important that you present this from the beginning. And so you don't want to necessarily be introducing what's going to happen afterwards when you're already in the middle of something. Typically having this first end and understanding when I finish this, I'm going to get access to this is going to have a better impact if the student knows beforehand that that's the case. They already know what they're working for, so they're more motivated to do it. If you try to tell a student what they're working for when they're already upset and they're frustrated, they might not even listen to you. So it's not going to have the effect that you want. So keep that in mind, that little detail. And then, the other thing that you can do is having contingency statements and advance warnings. And so for instance, whenever possible, you want to explain to the child using language that matches the receptive level, like we mentioned before, the contingencies that rule their behavior. So that could be anything like the first then statements that we talk about, or maybe having like if then statements. And you may also want to provide advance warnings. This could be particularly useful during transitions, but you will notice with time that advance warning only works when you're going from moderate to moderate transitions, meaning that if you're going from, let's say, doing a puzzle to maybe reading a book, it might work very well. But if instead you're going from a highly desired activity like playing on an iPad or the computer to maybe doing a math worksheet, you're going to find that even if you give an advance warning, it may not have that much of an impact. Why? Because there's no motivation to leave that high desired activity to go to something that they're not interested in. And so keep that in mind, because if you're able to, you may want to build your schedule in a way that you're trying to balance going from moderate to moderate transitions as much as possible. And when you do implement something like, let's say, like a computer time or an iPad time that it's going to be hard to transition off of, then maybe the next thing should be like having another type of break or doing something that's fun, say like going to the playground or something like that. I know that it's not always so easy. And I know that there's always going to be that one activity that you can have something just as fun right after. But try to think in your mind, how can you best accommodate or make exceptions for somebody where maybe you build in something in between. So like, let's say if somebody's having a hard time leaving their iPad, maybe I can finish their iPad time 10 minutes earlier, but they can do something that they love also, like playing with a toy, but maybe already in the other area. So I already helped them transition to the area that I wanted them to be in. And so that's already half the battle right there. And so try to think of these things and see how maybe they can help you with some of the challenges that you may be having in the classroom. The other thing that you can use, and many of you may have seen this already, are token boards. And so, you can have these boards that may vary in the way that they look because they can be specifically designed to each student. And a lot of them, you know, if it's a girl, you may see princesses. If it's a guy, you may see, I don't know, characters of like Disney movies or things like that. But the idea is that the child can see what they're working for from the beginning of a task. So they can see how much work they need to do. If your experience has been as similar as mine, you know, you probably have noticed that a lot of our students don't have a really good concept of time. And so it can be very overwhelming to not understand how long am I going to have to do this work for? You know, if you came into work every morning and you didn't quite understand what time you're going home, you probably wouldn't have that much of a good day. So it's important for us to help them understand, look, you know, this is not forever. This is something that's just momentary. And it's not, you know, look visually, look how much progress you're already making towards that end goal. And this is where the token boards become very, very useful. You know, the other thing that they do is that they allow you to provide, you know, reinforcement without necessarily interrupting the instruction. And so let's say somebody loves playing with a specific toy, but that toy is incompatible with them writing something on a worksheet, then obviously you're not going to be able to give that toy every time they do something. But instead, they can work towards that toy for when they finish the worksheet. So the token board allows you to be given those tokens that they love and have them even, they can be the ones to put them themselves and they can feel proud about it while they're getting to that end goal that they want. And you may find that that also allows you to get more work done, you know, and it allows you to, again, point out the things that they're doing positively while they're getting the work done. Every token that's being delivered is going to come with a descriptive praise. So it's a combination of that token that's already something that they like a character or something. Then it's you giving the praise for what they did appropriately, you know, and getting that bit of attention. And then it's them knowing that excitement of, okay, I'm one step closer to what I want. So obviously when they get to that point, they get access to what you promised. It's important that you keep, you know, like we said about following through, you have to follow through with this as well. If you said 4 tokens and they got 4 tokens, that's it. They get a break or they get access to what they wanted. This is going to be important because children do pay attention to these things. And if you want a lot of these strategies to be successful, you have to be consistent. Because the minute that it seems like you're not keeping your end of the bargain, you're going to start seeing some problem behavior arise. What are some other strategies that we can use? We can always offer choices. Offering choices is very, very important, I feel, because a lot of our students have so much support that they're not even allowed to make decisions a lot of times, to the point where they don't even develop that skill. You know, if they had to choose between one toy or the other, maybe that's a little easier because they have very specific preferences for that. But if you start broadening from the 2 most preferred toys to maybe like in a range of 10 toys, maybe they don't know what to choose. And it's important for them to play that game, to understand, okay, I chose this one and this is what I'm gonna get now. Maybe later I'll get something else. I didn't like this one so much, so I'm gonna choose something else next time. It's important for them to be exposed to different items in their environment because they may discover new things that they like that they will never know have they not been exposed. So I think that's important. I think it also puts it on them to be the ones to decide what they're more motivated by and to not be like, why are you giving me this? That's the decision that they made. So it takes you away from being this sort of like bad person that's always trying to, you know, control everything in their lives, especially even with like as they get older and they become more and more aware, you want them to be able to make their own choices. Obviously, you can restrict the type of choices that are going to be in there. But believe me, it really changes everything when they feel like, okay, I'm in control. Then obviously you're going to want to break down the difficult tasks into any, you know, into easier components. You know, so maybe things that typically you put instructions in 3 steps, maybe for them it might take 10 steps. You know, you might have to really think and maybe even do things on your own and start recording how many things you really need to do. So going back to that example of, you know, maybe getting up from your table, putting your book away and grabbing your backpack, how many steps is that? You know, for us, maybe we think like, oh, it's just 3 steps. Maybe for somebody else, it's a couple more because it's getting up from your chair. Maybe then it's walking somewhere. Maybe then it's visually finding the place. Then maybe it's maybe grabbing that backpack. Then maybe, so how many steps does it really take? So that's going to depend on the level of each person that we're trying to work with. We should always try and adjust the frequency and the delivery of demands. Not all the days are going to be the same. One day, the child maybe didn't sleep at all. They had a rough time. Maybe they have a toothache that they can't express because they're nonverbal, or an ulcer, because they don't eat that properly because they have, picky eating issues. We have to be mindful of these things as far as the expectations that we're trying to set. Because realistically speaking, we don't all perform at the same level every single day. So don't be afraid to sometimes adjust those things to the level that you think that they're going to be successful. Um, Also try to, switch between those hard tasks and those easy ones. Try to make it also fun for them to do things, not only challenging. Again, you want people to feel successful. You want to build that confidence. And we talked about following through with the instructions many times, but I do want to, say always reassess your environment. One of the things that's very interesting about behavior is that behavior is always constantly transforming. It's kind of like that thing that they say about like matter and the universe and all that kind of stuff, where like you say like it's always transforming. Well, behavior is the same. It's never static. And so even if you have the best intervention, you're always going to have to look at your environment, because it might be that a month later, a child may have learned another way to get access to what you had already taught in a proper way. So you may have to find another way to handle that, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that anyone did anything wrong. It just means that that's the nature of human beings, and we'll always have to constantly be adapting to the needs that our students have. Um, I talked a little bit before about practicing mock scenarios, but I wanted to give a little bit more information on that. And so, you guys can practice desired behaviors during off times. And the ways that you can do this is maybe by modeling the behavior that you want them to be able to do, providing feedback, again, at a time when that feedback won't be seen as something that's negative because the child or the student is in a good mood. And then reinforce it. Because what's going to happen is that if you're asking somebody to do something that they've never done before, how are they going to know that they're going to get a reinforcer at the end of that? They don't know that. Like, their life experience has not taught them that when they have to do something new, they get something amazing in return. That's not necessarily the case. So we have to be the ones to show them, okay, look, we're going to practice this, and this is how it's going to go down. When you're finished with this is what I'm going to give you. And then the next time you're presenting that, they're like, oh, I remember that when we did this thing, I got access to a few candies. So you know what? I'll go with your game. I'm going to try it out this time. What are some examples of things that we can practice? We can practice waiting, very important skill. So we talked about the tolerance before, requesting for more. So having that communication, that's going to be extremely important in making sure that somebody is in a good mood. It's them being able to communicate their basic needs, and then asking for attention. If you're teaching the child how to properly ask for your attention, then maybe they're going to be less likely to throw themselves in the floor. So these are important things that we can practice. But again, it's hard to practice them in the moment. If you are working with higher functioning individuals, or you're working with people that are of a higher age, you may notice that a lot of these things, they're more than happy to maybe practice them, but they don't want you to be giving them feedback in front of the other students because they're aware of that. It's very negative for them. So that might be a trigger for them. So this is why it's important to practice these things sometimes off book, at another time. So another point that they make on the checklist that you have is about the data, and how looking at this data is what really determines how the behavior plans are determined. So you need to make sure that you have a system for collecting data that's going to be established by your school. So your school, if you talk to your administration, they're going to say like, look, this is how we collect data on problem behavior. This is how we collect data on the instances where the student is being able to do things properly. And it should be that, not only is this monitored daily or weekly by the staff, but that any decisions that you make in regards to your intervention are based on that data. You shouldn't necessarily try things just because you feel it might work or because you feel it's not working. No, it should be because the data is showing you that this student seems to be struggling with this specific thing during this specific time. Why is that? Let's look at that a little bit further. That's what's great about the data, is that it doesn't fail you. It's not a recollection of what you kind of remember, but rather what really happened. So data is going to be your best friend in really building the best intervention that your student might benefit from. And again, if you need assistance on this, don't be afraid to reach out to your administration and tell them like, look, how would you recommend that I collect data on this specific thing? Like, how would you go about making a decision on this program? Like, what kind of data do I need to decide if I need to make a change in this type of goals? The other part that's that we always like to mention in our presentations, it's about restraint and seclusion. And over the years, we've gone around about what's best and not best to recommend. And this is what we've come up with at the end. And it's that, the procedures that we're presenting in this training, they're really explicitly designed to reduce the occurrence of problem behavior. And so the idea is that by that, that's going to decrease the likelihood of needing to use more restrictive procedures, such as restraint and seclusion. So the more antecedent strategies we're using, the better we are at implementing those, the less likely it is that we're going to have to resort to those reactive strategies like restraint and seclusion. It doesn't mean that it will never happen. No, that's not what we're saying. We understand that there's going to be special situations. But if that happens, if that is the case, then, and you find that really that behavior is presenting a risk to the individual, to yourself, to other students, then you need to refer to your administration for guidelines on how to proceed safely. Restraint and seclusion is not an intervention. It is not something that should be happening every day. And it's not something that is going to lower the incidence of problem behavior. So if you find yourself utilizing this strategy to deal with something within a classroom every day or very often, then that's something that needs to be looked at, because it can potentially just become worse and worse and worse. The other thing that we talk about is that every case is unique. And so, because every case is unique, you should never be afraid to, turn into your available resources. And there's multiple available resources that you have. You can reach out to us, for instance. If the family has a case manager, we're more than happy to assist the student. If they're not registered, then they can register. But even if the family doesn't want to register, if you as a teacher want some assistance, you can reach out to us. So you as a teacher can email us and let us know, or call us and be like, look, I want some suggestions on strategies for my classroom. And we're more and more happy to provide that, because at the end of the day, we're on the same team. We're part of the UE, just like you guys, and our mission is to assist you with this. And for instance, I know that in Miami-Dade County, we have what we call the Autism Support Unit, and I imagine that you guys have something similar in Monroe County, and I don't know if it goes under the same name, but sometimes the district has specific team members that are there to go out to schools and assist with maybe creating some of the systems that we talked about, like maybe creating a token board, maybe assisting a teacher on how to implement a prompting hierarchy, things like this. So they can be useful in maybe giving you more information or helping you practice some of the things that you're trying to implement. And then obviously, the other resource that you have is that a lot of the families that you might be working with actually may have a certified behavior analyst. So, if that's the case, don't be afraid to collaborate, because again, what you might be going through, maybe they've gone through it already. So they can give you very, very useful information as to how it has worked for them. And vice versa, maybe you guys can do the same. A lot of our students don't necessarily generalize things. So it might be that you guys have accomplished something at school that they haven't accomplished at home. So that communication, I think it's always going to be very, very beneficial to the student. And that's what we have to think about always is what is best for our student. So let me see here. That's all that I have as far as the presentation. So I'm gonna check the chat box and see. Okay. This, I see that Christy shared some, let's see. Okay, I think that those are, I don't know if that's the Padlet that she mentioned or if that's going to be the one form. So let me finish here anyways, just in case. So like I said, you know, if you guys need anything, you can always reach out to us. Our information is here. You know, if it's easier, you can use the QR code, you know, to go on our website. You can share that, you know, and with your families also. And then I think that we do have a survey that we would like for you guys to complete. And so I think the easiest way for you guys to go and complete that is to just scan this on your camera on your smartphone and go on that form. And essentially, you're going to find the training for the keys in there in the Dropbox to choose from. And once you pick that one, then you can fill out the rest of the form. It won't take you too long, but we always welcome the feedback because it really helps us, you know, do a better job of what we do. We want to really understand if you guys feel like there was something else that we could have done better, or if you guys, you know, feel like there's something that you want to see more of. So please do take the time to do that because it's very, very useful for us. I don't know if anybody has any questions, and I noticed that Christy wrote the title of the survey so that you can find it on the Dropbox. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, please, you can tell me now. You can write it in the chat box, and I'll be happy to address those. If, for instance, later on you come up with questions and you know, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. It doesn't have to be now. It could be that later on something else comes up and you're like, oh, I could really benefit from talking to the team at UMNSU CAR. So feel free to reach out at any point. We want to thank you for taking the time to listen to us. We want to thank you also for taking the time to educate all of our kids and our young adults. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and I'll stay maybe for a few more minutes in case somebody needs access to the survey or if any other questions come up. Okay, thank you so much, everyone.